Thank you, Ali and Cache, for having me. I'm Tracie Konopinski. I work with MassCreative as our program director. So MassCreative, we're the statewide arts advocacy organization. We work with artists and arts leaders all across the Commonwealth. Our mission is to build vibrant, healthy, connected, equitable communities. You may notice that arts and culture is not in that statement, but we use arts and culture as the vehicle to make that happen. It's not by accident. Ali invited me to talk a little bit about arts advocacy, to give you an opportunity to engage in our work, particularly what we're focusing on right now, just time-wise, is the statewide budget process, which is kind of boring and wonky, but really important. So I guess I'll start off by just asking, why do you think that Massachusetts has an arts advocacy organization? Why, out of anything under the sun, any issue, do you think that we got founded? So why arts advocacy?
We have so many artists that are unrecognized in the state.
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of tend to be invisible sometimes. I'm a dancer, right? It's like I'm in the studio, artists are in their studios, performances are happening on stage, but we're not always outside of our people. Yeah.
Well, art is like everything. It changes everything. It has, a spiritual and emotional and educational and cultural impact on everything. And without it, we would be pretty messed up.
Yeah, I agree. It's like arts is the way that I see the world. I know not everyone sees that, but I think that's the case that we need to make, is that it is a connector and it's a driver for so many of the other issues that we care about. Anything else?
Businesses have to rely more on art, the art community.
Yeah, I think that everyone wants to be an innovator or a problem solver, right? It's like my dad is a maintenance guy. He probably would say he's not creative. He loves music. And he's a problem solver, and he learned that because he was a creative kid, always out in the woods getting in trouble. Don't tell him that I told you that. Yeah, exactly. So all of these reasons, and so, our story kind of comes to play in 2010, so you can think back several years. A bunch of arts and cultural leaders came together. So it was Mass Cultural Council, so the state arts agency, the Boston Foundation, the Bar Foundation, leaders of large and small organizations came together just to talk about the state of the arts. And the conversation was really interesting. It kind of went in two different directions. One is that we talked about the vibrancy of the community. So I'm sure none of this is surprising, as we have a really broad and diverse arts and cultural community. That means that it's across genres, right? It's everything from music, science, humanities, dance, theater, media arts. It's all across the spectrum. It's all across the state. It's large organizations down to the small neighborhood community art centers. So there's just such a breadth of the work and such a depth to it too. So it's not just the large ones or not just the small ones. We've got a really diverse community. We also have the most number of organizations per capita in Massachusetts, the most number of arts organizations, so more than New York per capita. Yeah, so people think this number is really surprising, is the Mass Cultural Council, they give out 6,000 grants every year to organizations. That is no small amount.
That's not including LLCs, that's on their own.
It's including the LLCs, yeah. The LCCs. Sorry. No, that's okay. So that was all part of the one conversation, is like there's just so much vibrancy, there's so much happening, it's world class, it's internationally known. And then the other part of the conversation is like, well, despite all of that, we're facing some major problems, especially when it comes to funding. So if you look at this graph, actually in 1988, the state arts agency, the Mass Cultural Council, was funded at $27 million.
Oh, wow.
That's not new investment, right? That's saying we believe that arts and culture is a public good. It means that we're investing public dollars, hard-earned taxpayer money, to say all boats rise with the tide. If this is something that we value on a national level, if we value it on a state level, it's going to build up through the communities. But yet, you can see how it was on a slow and then sporadic or very speedily decline. So basically overnight it was Governor Swift cut the budget, basically 60%. It was around the recession, so we weren't the only thing that was being cut, but it's been a slow uphill battle to get us back to the money that, it's not new money that we're asking for. We're being asked to build it back to where it was. So this was one of the problems that was discussed. We're just on the decline. And it's not just statewide either. It's, you think about Boston, we're like the Athens of America, apparently. But yet, guess how much Boston, this was, let's say 4 years ago, guess how much Boston invested in arts and culture? $0. $0.
What?
$0. The line item within the city's budget directly going to arts and culture was 0.
Whoa.
Yeah, so just another one of the challenges. The other was just looking at arts education. So we're the birthplace of public education in America, but yet because we are teaching to the test, arts education is one of the things that's being edged out. I'd like to also mention that civics is being edged out, so that's kind of an interesting correlation.
That's awful.
Yep. And so arts education used to be really vibrant, K through 8, K through 12, and it's being edged out. So one of the reasons after this conversation was the reason why is because we weren't playing the political game. So I mentioned this earlier, is that, artists are in their studios, we're in rehearsal, we're performing, stagehands are, wearing their black behind the scenes. We're not always playing the political game. A lot of times our art is very political in nature, but we don't always play within the systems of politics. You look at it both with engaging with legislators and when it comes to elections. Lots of other advocacy organizations engage in elections. So, the ACLU, the Sierra Club, they always issue a questionnaire or a scorecard of candidates. And the arts community just kind of said, oh, that's like not really for us. We're going to stay out of that. And that was the problem, is that we weren't playing the game, and so we weren't paying attention to politicians. We weren't asking them about what they thought about arts and culture, so they weren't talking about it. And then because they weren't talking about it, artists and creatives weren't engaging. So really, MassCreative got founded to address this problem, to be able to work not just on the executive level on building support, but also from everyday citizens. So this is our mission. So the world that we live in is, I like to talk about the intersection of art and politics. So I grew up in South Jersey by Philly. I have Polish immigrant parents. I was basically taught, don't talk to strangers, don't talk about politics, and don't talk about money. And that is basically my entire career. But my parents are pretty proud because they definitely raised me to be really opinionated and go out there and solve problems. And so really the work that MassCreative does is this political organizing meets the arts. Really, it all makes sense based on how I grew up. So there's 3 things that MassCreative does as part of our organizing model. We call it the tripod. There's 3 things that we do. So one is that we tell stories. I think that if you asked your neighbor, I would say 1 out of 5 neighbors are going to say, yeah, arts and culture, like I totally believe that in my heart of hearts. It's something that I really believe in and I fight for. The other 4 are going to be like, that's nice. Yeah, like my kid plays piano. I think it's like a good add-on to their experience. And so we need to tell the stories of the impact of arts and culture outside of our circles. Right, so dancers don't always talk to theater artists, visual artists don't always talk to writers, and so we have to break down those silos, both across genres, across the state, across the big and small organizations, and make sure that those stories are told outside of our silos. The second piece is advocacy. It's just asking for what we need. So we always use this example that we should be like the AARP. So if you ever cut Social Security benefits, you would have an uproar across the country, regardless of how active that community is. And when the arts funding gets cut, most people say, oh, we knew that was going to happen. And so we kind of roll over when something bad happens rather than get up and fight. So we're not feared at all as an arts community, right? I think legislators know that we're like not going to come after them with our paintbrushes. But really, we should be asking for what we need, not just what we think we can get. So we just need to be bolder. You basically won't ever get things unless you ask for them. And mostly, I think that people are just waiting to be asked to engage and waiting to be asked to do the right thing. They want to be hero. And then last piece is organizing. So this is what we do really well. So this is all the idea that we should bring lots of people together to tell stories, to ask for what we need, and to do it in a united way so that it actually builds power with the right decision makers. So being able to ask the right people to do the right thing at the right time is all what organizing is about. So I want to talk a little bit more about these pieces. Oops. So in terms of telling stories, this is something really interesting that we've been exploring a lot lately, is when we started as an organization, it was all about just, kind of building our base. So we needed to preach to the choir. So it was all about getting arts and cultural organizations to say, yes, we want our institutions to have support, we want our artists to have resources, we want to be recognized by key decision makers. And so how do we build that power? But yet, that's just a portion of the population, and really, if we want to have a vibrant, healthy, equitable Massachusetts that arts and culture plays a big role in, we need to convince everyone else. And so really what we need to do is talk about how arts and culture is a connector and how it should be a respected, expected part of society. So just imagine, I heard about how there's, 40 consecutive days of events. That means that people are going to start to expect whenever they go in Bedford Square that there's going to be arts and culture. That's exactly what we want, not just from arts and cultural leaders, but from every single resident, is to expect it, to value it, to recognize it as like, this isn't just something that is a sometimes thing, this is something that's an always thing. So that's part of our storytelling. The other thing is that we tell stories on the macro level. So we want to be able to elevate the stories of like the Pittsfields and the New Bedfords, the gateway cities, these post-industrial cities, but be able to tell that story not just on an individual level, but a macro level for what it means for the entire state, even if people say, oh, I've never been to Pittsfield, because the stories of Pittsfield are not that far away. So we tell stories on the macro level. We want to make sure that people are connecting on a personal level, so we bring people together, we make sure to break down those silos between the large organizations and the small organizations. This is all part of what helps people tell a story far and wide. And we also use kind of traditional sources, so we always work to get the arts and cultural community media attention, and this means outside of the arts and entertainment section, right? So this means like on the front page, this means in the opinion section, in the editorial section, in the political section. So these are just some of the headlines that we've gotten in the Boston Globe. So, public transportation is like all that Charlie Baker cared about in his first term. And so we worked on a campaign to get public art back on the MBTA. And there it is. It's like literally art and public transit in the same headline. So it's making that arts and connection. Same thing, arts agenda for Charlie Baker. No one really thinks of that guy as an arts guy, but yet there's arts, one word away from his name. And our other work in the community. So doing traditional media work. And then we also use social media. So I've heard it a lot today. Let's put it out on our social channels. More and more, this is the way to go. It's kind of the great equalizer in being able to reach people. And more that we don't have dedicated reporters to arts and culture. This is the way to get your story out there. A lot of our work actually gets picked up because we run a hashtag campaign. We run it like a political campaign so that it goes viral, and that's where we get the stories. So our Arts Advocacy Day, we literally made this up. We made the Friday 2 weeks before the election Arts Matter Day. It just means hey, share your story about why arts and culture matters to you and your community. Tag your decision makers because they're running for office. Make sure that they know 2 weeks before the election that they should be talking about this. And it got us media attention. I mean, it was literally just a social media campaign. So it definitely works. So that's all storytelling. This is our piece on advocacy. So this is our platform. So as you can see, it's not just about arts and culture. It's not just about the arts sector, but it's about building, living, wow, I'm combining all those words, livable, healthy, and vibrant communities. Building a dynamic economy that's empowered by the arts, educating the whole child, making sure that every kid has access and is participating in arts education throughout all their schooling years. And then let's build public policies for equal access and opportunity for the arts community. So this is all of our campaigns fall under these planks. So these are all our overarching goals of what we want to do as an organization. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our campaigns and then tell you what you can do literally today to make an impact. So one of the big issues that we work on is public funding for the arts. So I think this is kind of the bread and butter of the organization in terms of advocacy work, and it's also what the arts sector in terms of institutions really care about. So you remember that graphic of where funding was at 27 million and then it went down to 9.6. So when we first started in 2012, one of the first campaigns that we ran was to increase the Mass Cultural Council budget. And it was kind of the first time that it happened in a really vibrant way. So executive directors had always been, those who had the capacity had been lobbying their legislators. But the difference is that we pulled together lots of organizations and lots of individuals to email and send social media posts and to meet with their legislators face to face, and it made a big impact. So this is just over, in the first 3 years of our organization's founding, we had a 66% increase in the Mass Cultural Council budget and the Cultural Facilities Fund, which is real money for institutions that own buildings for capital campaigns. So it's a $33.6 million increase for state arts funding. So big success story. The past 3 years are a different story, which I'll talk about later. Another great thing that we did is it's not just about state funding, it's also about municipal funding. So if we're saying as a Commonwealth, we really value arts and culture as one of our public goods, it means every single municipality should be saying the same thing. But yet, there's like less than 20 municipalities that have a line item, a dedicated line item in their budget for arts and culture. And so what we did in 2013 was, who remembers when Mayor Menino was stepping down after 20 years? It just opened up this whole conversation across the city about what is our vision, not just for arts and culture, but across all these different issues. And it brought together the arts community, it brought together the environmental community, and people really started dreaming big. So it was less about let's save our funding, but it was more about what if we had a fund for public art? What if we had a cabinet level position? And what if we integrated arts into every single agency that works in the city? So we ran a campaign called Create the Vote, which is all about getting candidates and voters talking about arts and culture. And through the process, Mayor Marty Walsh said that he was going to build a renaissance in Boston, an arts renaissance. And he's followed through on a lot of his commitments that he made during the campaign because the arts and cultural community was so engaged. So hired a cabinet level position, ran a cultural plan, put in dedicated funding for individual artists, did a Percent for Public Art program, so really building Boston into more of the arts renaissance that we always thought we were. So that's funding. We also work on arts education, so we want to make sure that every kid, regardless of where they live, where they grow up, where their parents get their paycheck, that they had access to a quality arts education and that they're participating in it. So what we did last year is the federal government put out new guidelines for what states should do in terms of measuring success of every child in every school across the country. So in Massachusetts, they opened up this process to say, what should we measure? It used to be that we were just measuring test scores, just measuring graduation rates, and the state said, we can't just measure what a kid comes out of school with. We need to measure what a kid is getting in their education. So we ran a grassroots campaign with educators and teachers and parents and students to get arts as one of those measurements, and we won. It's not finished, obviously, so the state is putting out report cards that measure school by school success and district by district success, and so they're measuring both participation in the arts and access. And we want to make sure that that process is really inclusive and transparent, and that parents are using it. So in order, to make their decision around their child's education. We also work on public art. So I know this is something big in Medford. we really believe that art is the great equalizer. It helps to bring communities together. It helps to revitalize downtowns. There's endless data on this. And we think it should be easier, right? It should be easier to access that money. It should be easier to build it. So we actually filed our first bill in the legislature last year to create a Percent for Public Art program. So it builds about $2 million off of state building costs so that projects can apply for that public funding in and around state buildings. So the top picture is in Lynn. They're really using public art to revitalize their downtowns. It's literally bringing people into neighborhoods that just a couple of years ago, people were saying, don't go there. Don't go there at dusk. It's really building a vibrancy in the community and making people re-identify what they think about the downtown of Lynn. And then below is Matt, our director, and a bunch of our public art friends from Lynn and Worcester and Cambridge testifying before the state legislature on the bill. Yeah, it's awesome. And that's going to create an incentive all across the Commonwealth. And then some of my favorite work that we do is around elections. So this is completely nonpartisan. We don't endorse anyone. It's a complete public education campaign. It's all about having that conversation. Elections are just such a cool time, right? It's like we come together, we exercise our vote for democracy, and we actually start to dream big about what our communities could look like and what our vision is. And if there's any time that you can get a politician to commit to something really bold, it's during an election. And so Create the Vote is what we do to educate voters and candidates about arts and cultural issues, and to really get candidates thinking about, oh, well, my priorities are this. Their education, their the environment, their housing, their the economy, but how does creativity and arts play a role in that, and how can I work with the arts and cultural community to help solve some of those big challenges? This is one of the articles that we got during Create the Vote campaign. It's an editorial. So folks know that editorial is basically the formal statement of the paper. The entire editorial board is basically saying, this we believe, and you should too. And they wrote one about how making arts policy should be a priority in elections. That's no small feat. Yeah. Okay, so that's all advocacy, and then the last piece is around organizing. So this is what we do really well. So who's ever heard the term grass tops organizing before? Right, you usually hear the other one, right? So grass tops, I'm sure you can take a guess at, it's more of the top-down approach, so it's more about the folks who have got a little bit more power, a little bit more clout, doing all the asking. So we do a combination of grass tops and grassroots, the everyday people. So what we do with grass tops organizations, so we work with folks like Michael at the MFA. He's got a great board. He's got a really powerful board. There are folks who are engaged politically. There are folks who are engaged in political fundraising. They, hold positions outside of the arts community, and so we work with Michael and his board to engage on our campaigns and to figure out how can we train other boards, just like the MFA board, to be engaged politically and to take their role as a board member, not just about the museum, but about the broader community. And we don't just do that with the big guys. We also do it with our 400 member organizations. So Cachet, thank you for being a member organization of MassCreative. Thanks for letting us work on your behalf. And then it allows me to do things like this and talk to you at your annual meeting. All comes full circle. And then we do grassroots organizing. So we bring people together, not just to do this, to make a big scene, but also to be, not just direct action, but to be strategic and asking for what we need, be measured in how we're escalating our tactics over time. So I always like to say, we're not the, if you don't want a tree cut down, we're not the folks who are going to chain ourselves to a tree. We're going to first ask, and then maybe do a petition, and then maybe do a letter to the editor, and then meet with you, and then get phone calls in your office, and then do a rally. So, building it up over time. The thing that makes our grassroots advocacy really strong is that we've got 30,000 advocates in the field, and this has largely come through organizations sharing our actions to build out the ripples of effect. So I think a lot of people say, oh, thank you for sending that email. I get your emails from Matt and I always take the action. But what we want people to do is not just take that personal action, but then share it with their immediate network. So share it with your family, your friends, your neighbors, your board, your coworkers, and then keep asking them to share it out, because we need not just arts and cultural folks, we need everyday residents who care about this stuff but don't know yet. And we also do organizational development. So myself and Matt and the rest of our team, spend time with boards, with our leadership council, with youth arts organizations, training folks on the basic skills of organizing, which, now we have universities dedicated to organizing. So Harvard has a school of politics where they teach organizing. It's Marshall Gans, who worked with Cesar Chavez on the United Farm Workers Movement, actually teaches organizing as a real major now, which is awesome. But really, we learned how to do this just by going out there and knocking on doors. And so what we kind of, within our menu, we talk about how to tell a story to get someone on your side. We talk about how to run a campaign from goals to strategies and tactics. We talk about power and how to think about a decision maker from their shoes, what really influences them. So it's not just facts, right? Who's ever tried to convince someone based on facts and it didn't work? Exactly.
It's total coincidence. That's me in the center of that picture.
Oh yeah. It's like Gary being so Gary and thoughtful in that photo.
Gary, put your finger like this.
That's amazing. That's so fun.
I have you right now.
It's so meta. Yeah, so if you have a group of people that you want to organize, whether it's within Cachet, whether it's at a public event, whether it's with a board, outside of the community, you can always ask us. So, part of what we do. So you're probably wondering, all right, that's awesome, Tracie. That's great that you do that, but what can I do? So right now, what's happening is the state budget process is going from the governor to the House to the Senate, and being voted on by the end of June. And so this, the state budget goes to a million different things, from transportation to education to healthcare. There's also a line item for arts and culture. So that it's in the Senate process right now. And so the challenge is that we've done a great job of increasing the arts budget in our first couple of years. But over the past 3, it stayed totally steady. So totally level. That doesn't mean that arts and cultural organizations are doing the same. They're actually doing more with less. And the capacity is just not at what we need to continue the level of work. So we've been advocating for an increase in funding, and basically what's happened is that we've advocated for an increase in the House and the Senate, and they've signed on to that, and then the governor has vetoed the money. So you think about Charlie Baker, he's a great guy, right? He's one of the most popular governors in the country. He works on both sides of the aisle, but we've got a lot of work to do to really convince him that arts and culture aren't just an add-on, that they're really necessary to the vibrancy of the community. So we have a lot of work to do to really convince him. And the only way that we can do that is by building a lot of support within the House and Senate, because they're the 2 bodies that work with him the closest. So what you can do, hopefully you can read that up there at the bottom. There's a little link that you can type into your phone. You have to use the capitalization, sadly, for it to work, but it'll take you to an action alert online. You can just fill in your zip code, and it has an automatic response that you can send right to your senator. If you don't have a phone on you, I'll make sure to send Allie the information to get it out to you, but you can also go right on MassCreative's website, and it's the first picture right on our website. You can click it. And if you're wondering what more you can do, right? Because I can, yeah.
I'm actually having a little trouble reading it. Can you just...
Oh yeah, it's bit.ly/, is it this way? Capital N, capital C, capital C, capital F, capital Y, and then 2019. Yep. I'll know to put that in white next time, just stand up. So you can always forward our emails to your friends and family and colleagues. We definitely always encourage folks to use social media and to tag your legislator. So don't just ask your friends to do it, but go directly to Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and say, hey, I was just at a CACHE annual meeting. We talked about the value of arts and culture. Would love to talk to you about it. Christine Barber. And the same thing when you're at a performance. So I was just at this performance. It was, it brought me together with my family and my friends. I met new people. It was a transformative experience. You should come too. Tag your legislator. You can invite your network to trainings and events. So we hold a bunch of events throughout the year, both advocacy gatherings, trainings, and just fun social events. So we're kicking off our season for the election. So we just want to hold a bunch of parties in July. So we're going to hold one in Somerville at Aeronaut. You're invited. Yeah, that's our plan. Also just work locally and statewide. So this is something that, I worked with Gary in the 2015 elections as we worked to get all the candidates talking about arts and culture. So you can take anything that we're doing on a statewide level and you can advocate for it locally. So a line item in the budget for arts and culture, a local percent for art program, hiring a cabinet level position. Basically everything that we can do, you can localize, and it's about both working locally and statewide that's going to make the biggest impact. And you can also become a MassCreative member. So our membership doesn't just give us financial support, but political support. So when myself and my colleague Emily go to the State House to talk with legislators, we can say, we're supported by 400 member organizations, and here's how many members are in your district. So that gives us political clout too. So there's so much you can do. You can also contact me. There's my contact information. You can follow us on social. And again, it's only going to work if we all take the action and that we're inviting other people to do it and figuring out how to talk about arts and culture to people who don't identify with it. But we all know the value of it, right? It's a big connector. Connection really matters, especially in a time when technology and politics tend to divide us. We're all looking for strong relationships and for positive social interactions. Arts and culture creates that in a big way. And we know that the arts and cultural community is at the center of making that happen. So thank you. I'm happy to take questions about the work that we do, but thanks for letting me do it.
So, to what extent does MassCreative engage in the federal picture?
Yeah, absolutely. So we used to not really engage federally because we got this very interesting dynamic in Massachusetts where we have an entire Democratic delegation in DC, which means that it's like a very strong Democratic force, but we don't have that much political sway when it comes to divisive issues or just things that need nonpartisan support. So our folks don't always have a lot of power. They're basically as strong as you can get, our congressional delegation on arts and culture. They do everything that they can to advocate for the NEA and arts education and rights for individual artists. But there's this interesting dynamic that has happened with the new presidential administration. Arts and culture is really a bipartisan issue. So presidents for many, many years have supported arts and culture on both sides of the aisle. President Nixon was one of the largest supporters of the NEA, really helped to increase it, as well as Kennedy. I mean, you always think about Kennedy when you think about arts and culture in the presidency. And so President Trump, both last year and this year, zeroed out the NEA. So that's not just decreasing it, that's saying like this should not exist because it's not a public value that I value. And that definitely goes against the grain of who we are as Massachusetts and who we are as a community and a society. And so, especially this year, we really rallied the troops to be able to fight against it. So we did a couple of fun things. We did just a petition, got thousands of signatures onto a petition to Congress saying, this directly goes against my values, please fight for it on the national level. We also did this great engagement piece with youth arts organizations. So folks may know that one of our taglines is Arts Matter, and we get folks to tell the story of why arts matters to them. We had a poster that we had young people fill out. It was like, the Banksy exhibit that's like Before I Die. It's got all the lines. We like used that model and said arts matters to me because, and we just got amazing stories from young people. We made copies of that and delivered it to every single office. It was so interesting because you're meeting with like 12-year-old staffers. They're just so young. And you're like, really, you're the gatekeeper? But you know, their job is to take notes and give it to their boss. So they really are a gatekeeper, even though they're very young. I know it sounds ironic when I'm telling you that because I'm also young, but I'm not 12. I promise you. It like cut through the visual landscape in the meeting, so they would kind of like be taking notes, and then all of a sudden they would start listening and start sharing their personal story. Even if they didn't identify as an artist, everyone's got a story about how creativity impacted their life, and so it just added this other layer to the conversations. And because it's such a bipartisan issue, the fight is really in Congress, and so both last year for last fiscal year budget. It's passed at $150 billion. Is that right? $150 million? I don't think it's. I'll get that number back to you. I think it's $150 million, yeah. And then just this week, 155 was passed for next fiscal year. So it's working in Congress, but it's because we've got strength on the local level.
It's just not a lot of money.
It's not. It's like literally a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
What's your view of our state delegation? Maldonado, Pat Jalen, Sean Carberly, Christine Barber. What should we know? Tips and tricks.
Yeah.
What's your view?
My biggest, I mean, you've got great support here, right? It's like you ask any of them and they say, I'm an arts and cultural supporter. Like Sean's dad is a painter. Pat Jalen's daughter is a dancer. Like everyone's got a connection, but you can't let them off the hook by just saying like, oh, I support the arts. You have to ask them to actually champion it. And that means actually standing up to the Speaker of the House or the Senate President and putting this in their list of priorities. So every year, every budget season, every legislative session, legislators have the opportunity to go to leadership and say, hey, these are my priorities, and then here are my secondary priorities. Not a lot of people have arts and culture on that list. Christine Barber does, which is amazing. She's one of the few. So that's a big piece, is just make sure that you're not just asking them for their support. You're not just letting them get away with saying like, I support you. But it's what are you going to do to like stand up for us in the legislature, and what can you do to champion it, and what can we give you to help make that easier? And then I think the other piece is really asking them about their priorities and saying, all right, what are your priorities and how can arts and culture play a role in that? So, you know, public health, mental health, isolation, and loneliness are big topics right now, and arts and culture plays a huge role in that, in addiction and recovery. And so it's kind of meeting them where they're already thinking policy-wise. And I guess the last piece is invite them to events, right? Because it's not just like giving them data. I think that lots of people talk about the return of investment on literally everything, which is helpful. But the arts and cultural community, we've got more than ROI. We've got stories that no one else has, and so don't forget to talk about that stuff. Don't just give data, because there's always going to be data that's going to be better than ours, right? It's like, yeah, the environmental industry is always going to generate more jobs than we will, and so don't pigeonhole yourself in just the data story. We've got stories that no one else can tell, so make sure you tell those too. Is that good enough for you?
Well, Maldonato's a tricky guy.
Yeah.
He was signed up to be here tonight.
You and I have talked about that before,
Yeah.
and I just was wondering if you had any further thoughts on it. The best way to engage him, you know, because he'll tell me, you're good, but
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's like, it's also asking them like, you know, what happens when we've got over 100 co-sponsors on an amendment to increase it to 17, and that doesn't pass? So this process is supposed to be democratic. How do we use the process to like do what we need it to do? And so it's like asking them when you're confused about the process, and then I don't know. There's nothing like having opposition in an election to light a fire. So Like we've seen this happen like all across the Commonwealth, folks who've been in comfortable positions and then all of a sudden have an opponent for the first time, and they're just so much more responsive to constituents, and they know who their constituents are, they know who they get information and asks from, and so there's nothing like a good election, a competitive election to really get people to commit and follow through, right? We all do that. It's like when we're a little bit scared, we're a little bit under pressure, we perform way better. Right? When we've got a little fire under us, like when we're comfortable, it's like when we do our, like, I don't know, I do my laziest work when I'm comfortable. So
We have a great education on the behind the backstory of what's going on. Thank you.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Any other questions? Well, Tracie's gonna stick around for a
Yeah.
little bit as we're kind of cleaning up and everything. If anybody has any other questions for her, wants to talk one-on-one.